Hey, you're listening to Blindsight. Let's go. Mental health isn't something to take lightly. It's time to fight. It's time to thrive. Let's do this.
And welcome to Blindsight. This is Bill Lundgren, your host, and as always, we're going to have a good program today. But before I introduce the guest, I want to make sure that you know about our feedback line, because we want to hear your opinions and programs. You want to hear any suggestions you may have, and there are two ways you can reach us. One is by telephone, and that is 720-712-8856. Or you can email us at feedback@aftersight.org. And we'd love to hear from you. And let you know there's also in May sometime we're going to be introducing a new podcast. I won't be involved, but two guys who really know the subject will be talking about blind sports. And so keep your ears peeled for that to start sometime in May. So for today, welcome, and I want to welcome our guest, Ethan Fisher, who has a story that I think is very important for people to hear, and he's been doing his best to help people by sharing his story. So, Ethan, welcome to Blindsight.
Bill, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be a part of this.
Great. Well, how are things going for you?
Things are going good. Right in the middle of speaking season. I kind of have a unique schedule. I have a college schedule as if I was a college student, where I have summers off, the holidays off, and then I work a lot during the spring semester and fall semester.
Yeah, and spring break is over, so you have to get back out there on the circuit.
Yes, sir. It doesn't really matter what spring break it is. They just rotate me around. So every different region in the country has spring break at different times. So I can always find a way to stay busy this time of year.
Yeah. Okay. So you weren't giving any programs in Florida on the beach for the rest of the kids.
No, I was actually in Maine in a blizzard on Thursday.
Oh, geez. Well, okay. Well, what I wanted to do is to have you tell us what you've been sharing with the students and, about your story, because I think I think it's very important to have you do that. So I'll let you start.
Yeah. So basically what it comes down to is I use my life experiences as a precautionary tale for students. I made a lot of poor choices and decisions in my middle school, high school, and college careers, to the point where the elevator pitch or elevator story is basically I failed out of 5 different small-time college basketball programs due to drugs and alcohol. But what the underlying factor is mental health. And I had untreated mental health since I was in middle school. And part of my story and why it's so important, my keynote for students, is I actually talk about my first suicide attempt in 8th grade and dealing with the mental health issues and depression that I faced, since I was 13, 14 years old. And that's the thing about mental health is it's an ongoing battle. It's never like you fix yourself and everything's 100% okay. It's a constant battle in the sense of, developing the right tools in your toolbox and learning how to navigate life, because the reality is life is extremely difficult. There's no easy way about it. There's no easy button. We all face some type of pain and struggle along the way. And so what happened was, at my 5th college, I ended up going out to a house party like most college students do. and ended up drinking wine for the first time and woke up in a blackout 24 hours later to a nurse telling me that I drunk drove and killed somebody.
Ouch.
Yep. And from that moment forward, laying in that hospital bed, my life completely was altered and changed. And the worst part about it is an entire family's life was altered and changed because of my choices. And I tell students all the time, obviously I've been through a lot and I've struggled with mental health and suicidal ideation, and I've been through a lot, but at no point during any of my speeches or talking about this stuff do I want anybody to feel sorry for me, because I put myself in that situation. And people need to feel sorry for Bill's family. And Bill was the individual that lost his life in my accident. And so I just want to stress that no matter, interview, podcast, speaking, I just want people to understand, there's no feeling sorry for me. An entire family lost their husband and their father and their grandfather because of my choices around alcohol, and the underlying factor of untreated, depression and mental health. So that's why my job as a keynote speaker is so important. I tell people all the time, I think I have the most important job on the planet. I think I have the best job in the world, because I literally get an opportunity to change and alter students' lives for the direction, for the remainder of their life, based off of the choices that they start making from that moment forward.
Mm-hmm. So you say from 13, 14 was when the depression started?
Yes, sir.
And then you tried to commit suicide. And what happened? What did people do when they stopped that?
So in my case, it was a moment where I was in a fight with my parents, and I threatened my parents at the top of my lungs that I was going to kill myself, and I grabbed a knife and ran out to the barn and actually had it to my wrist and was getting ready to cut my wrist, and my dad came out and stopped me. But why I stress this so much is I don't blame my family. I don't blame anybody that I've been around. But at that point during the 80s and 90s when I grew up, mental health wasn't talked about as we're discussing now.
Right.
And so nobody ever knew about that moment. So my family and I kind of just brushed it under the rug and never discussed it again. And a big reason to why I turned to drugs and alcohol was that was how I dealt with all that pain and trauma that I had internally, and hid behind
self-medication.
The bottle. Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm. That's what often happens, is the self-medication, and then everybody looks to the drinking instead of looking at the underlying thing, or what we call now a dual diagnosis.
Yep, 100%.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I believe my story and my message is so important. And it's not because of everything that I've been through, but I think it's that opportunity to have this open discussion where, and the data and the numbers, can change based off of each year, but roughly, 70 to 80% of people who are dealing with mental health issues when they're young end up becoming addicts and alcoholics later on because they end up self-medicating.
Right.
And so if I can get that 7th grader, that 8th grader to never try alcohol or never smoke weed to deal with that pain that they're facing, I've just saved them from a life of addiction. Mm-hmm. And that's why, again, I think my program's so important, because if I can get one of those 8th graders to say, man, I need to talk to a counselor versus self-medicating, I've just completely altered their entire life and they don't even know it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What do the kids that you talk to tell you? I know you talk to them as well as talk to them. What are they telling you what they need?
So that's the best part of my job. It's not me being on stage. It's me standing in line where I have 100 kids waiting in line to come talk to me after an event. And
Okay.
and every story is different. I've heard some of the most horrific, heinous things that have happened to students, traumatizing moments that, you know, you don't like to repeat. And the sad part is there are hundreds of those stories from every
Yeah.
school that I go to.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some of the stories are just, thank you, Mr. Fisher. It was an inspiration. You changed my whole outlook on life. But a lot of the times it's the kids who are struggling with the mental health aspect. You know, Mr. Fisher, I've tried to commit suicide 5 or 6 times, and they'll show me the cuts on their wrist. How many times that they've had to check themselves into a mental health institution because of what they're going through. Like any story you can imagine, I've probably heard it from these students, and that's the important part of my job, because I'm not telling these students anything that the administrative staff are not saying, the teachers aren't saying, their coaches aren't saying, or their parents aren't saying. I just happen to be a stranger that comes in and airs out all my dirty laundry so that they feel safe, and it makes them open up. And a lot of times I hear stories that they've never told an adult before because they've never felt safe.
Right. Well, the thing is, when somebody tells their story, it has the strength to tell the story, then that's a role model for them to say, you don't need to keep the secret.
Yep.
And that's a powerful thing that your story can do for people.
Oh yeah. I think that's one of the coolest benefits to my job and most powerful is seeing these kids in a matter of moments go from social anxiety, never talking to anybody, completely scared, and they will actually come up and show the strength to come talk to me and then tell their story, and you can just see this weight lifted off of them. And it for that moment in time, it completely changes how they view themselves and gives them confidence, because a lot of times I'll tell them, if I was in their same shoes, I don't know if I
Right.
would have had the strength of the courage to come up and speak to the speaker like myself. I would have been too afraid. And so they're already showing a strength that I don't think they realized they had until that moment in time.
Well, I know you've talked about, in terms of your finding out the news about what happened, you had a very strong reaction yourself to what you did. Can you tell us a little bit about that moment when they told you what happened in the hospital?
Yeah. So I ended up basically just crying for, I don't even know how many hours in that hospital, with my hands on my face and just crying in that hospital bed. And what it boiled down to, and I say this in my keynote, is I had 3 choices. And what ultimately ended up happening and changing my life was I had a conversation with God. And God told me to handle my responsibilities. And it wasn't like I heard some powerful voice that reverberated through the halls and, there's no flashing
Right.
lights. But I just remember sitting in that hospital bed and having this over encompassing feeling and conversation, that God told me to handle my responsibilities. And ever since that moment, my life is completely changed. And I've been striving every moment since that moment to be a better human being, because I believe God gave me a second chance.
Mm-hmm.
And so I work extremely hard since that moment to be a better person. Now, obviously, it hasn't been easy, and there's been some ups and downs along the ways. But the best part about it, from my standpoint, is And I tell students all the time, I make a choice every single day to never take a sip of alcohol because I think alcohol is the most dangerous drug on the planet. And so I made a vow and a promise to God, but also to Bill's family, to never drink again, because I never want to be put in that situation to hurt or harm somebody else. And so my life has changed from that moment.
I think it's really essential that as a male, you're expressing that it's okay to reveal the secret and to share your feelings with both the boys and the girls and men and women, because there is kind of a lift yourself up by the bootstraps and deal with whatever is going on, rather than saying, hey, it's okay to feel and to admit there's some issues are going on, instead of hiding it with alcohol.
I think it's extremely important. Why? Because when I started actually breaking down the numbers, I've been fighting for the kids for so long. I started speaking on the mental health piece 2014, 2015 with the youth. But when you actually break down all the data and the research, and I think Jonathan and I talked about this in the pre-call, but roughly 75% of people that die from alcohol are by middle-aged men. And why?
Yes.
Well, because we've been trained our entire lives not to talk about pain or the trauma, to mention that we're depressed or we're sad. And if you come across as sad or depressed, then you're weak. And so I know from my personal experience, I told one of my friends this, from the crash, at like 2 days after the crash, and when I woke up in the hospital and all that process took place, I never shed a tear from after the second or third day of the crash, when I woke up I had to check myself into an actual mental institution for a couple of days. But I didn't shed a tear until like 2014. And that was because I was going into a prison system where you definitely don't talk about your weakness and your pain. And so
yeah.
I never shed a tear, and I buried all that stuff and internalized it. But when I became a speaker, I started realizing how many men are dealing with so much pain and trauma from their youth and their adolescence, that they just keep buried up inside, and they turn to drugs and alcohol as a coping mechanism. And so I saw it as my platform and my opportunity to be this man that's gone through all this stuff and be vulnerable with his story and say, hey, I've been dealing with mental health and depression basically my entire life. I know for a fact that if I would have got counseling in middle school and high school, my life would be completely different. And the chances are I never get into that vehicle and take Bill's life. And so I think if I would have addressed my mental health and been vulnerable and talked about my issues in middle school, the life I had would have never taken place. And so that's
right.
why I think it's so important to have these conversations, so that men can feel safe and say, hey, yeah, I lost my job. It doesn't mean I'm worthless and I'm, a loser. It just means I'm going through a hard time. Let's make a plan and figure out what job I can get next and go from there. But oftentimes they feel so bad, especially during the pandemic. So many men took their life during the pandemic because they felt embarrassed that they lost their job and they had no financial income coming in. And it was the easier way out, and it's sad.
Well, I don't want to get into the mystical that much, but I've always felt that something like what you went through, there's a call for you to do something different and make a difference in other people, and that's the opportunity that you took in doing the speaking to the people who very much need to hear you.
Yes, sir. I've dedicated my entire life to this mission of speaking and spreading not only my story, but with the intent of discussing these topics of mental health, to address the issue of awareness of what drugs and alcohol can actually do. you know, to be open and vulnerable about your story, because the reality is we all have stories. I tell people all the time, any person can be a keynote speaker. Anybody can stand on stage and tell their story and have it be impactful. It's just how many people want to stand on stage and do that process over and over and over again. A lot of people don't,
Right.
because there is a lot of pain and trauma in it. But I will sacrifice my pain and trauma and having to go through those hard topics when I have a line of kids that completely change and alter their life and saying, hey, Mr. Fisher, I'm going to go see a counselor now because you're strong enough to admit to go see a counselor. That changes their life. And that's the greatest part of my job.
Absolutely. Yeah, and ever since the COVID, what the schools are finding, they don't have enough mental health counselors to meet the need. That's the one. That's the downside that we're facing. That people need to realize we need to have more people there, people like you, and people who are trained professionals to work and help these kids get better. And the adult, as you say, you're not doing corporate work now, are you?
Not yet, but the intent to move into corporate is coming with when my book gets released. I think I can do some incredible work in the corporate world, especially with men who are holding on to this pain and trauma of, hey, let's discuss these issues, because if you don't address these issues, your personal life is going to struggle. Your relationships are going to struggle, and oftentimes when that struggle comes, where do people go? They go to the bottle. They go to self-medicating, like you mentioned in the beginning. And if I can get individuals in corporate America to go out to every single happy hour and take a chance of getting in a vehicle and putting somebody's life in because they go out every happy hour because they're sad with their life. Well, if I can get them to realize that there's other options and avenues for them, again, we make them pivot and find what they truly want to do with this life. But I just think, especially after the pandemic, our entire world, our social, emotional communication has taken a huge hit because of the pandemic, and we're still all struggling with it now.
Yes, we are. Well, what are you talking about in your book? What's the title of the book? Do you have one officially assigned to it?
So yes, and I have to look it up because it got changed when it got to the copy editor, and so I have to remember what what the title, because we changed it multiple times.
Oh, yeah, that's the problem. Before you actually, you're not even sure of the title until it's actually on the bookshelves.
Yeah. So we finalized it from failure to success, 5 keys for profound change.
Oh, wow.
And so
Okay.
I talk about my struggles in the book, and a big piece of it is the mental health. And if you don't address your mental health, I think that's the foundational piece to all life. If you can't take care of your brain, you're going to struggle in all aspects of life. And then I talk about my 5 keys that I've used every day since those prison cells to stay on the path I'm at, to where, I've been sober for 20 years. I've started a speaking career and got all those degrees and everything that I've accomplished by using those 5 keys. And so I give, readers, here's my story. These are the things that I've used my life to change who I am as a person. And this is what you can do as well.
And what are the 5 things that you keep every day? Can you share those with us?
Yeah. So my 5 keys to success is, number 1 is accountability. I think people need to stop pointing fingers at other people and realize they are sitting in that seat because of the choices and decisions they've made up until that point. Now you could have had a horrible family life. You could have had a horrible relationship. You could have had success. You could, whatever situation it is. But if you don't look at yourself and realize that you've made hundreds, if not thousands, of choices to put you in that position, then it's your fault for being in that position if you're unhappy, because you could have made countless changes. So I look at it as hold yourself accountable to no matter who you are. Like, I can never blame anybody for getting me drunk or high. I have to live with that. That's on me for the rest of my
Right.
life.
Right.
And so I wake up every day and realize I can't take a drink of alcohol. I've had some of the closest people in my life ask me to drink, and guess what? They're no longer a part of my life, because
Right.
I'm not going to allow them to mess up my life. And that's holding myself accountable to what I know is my biggest weakness, and that's alcohol.
Okay.
Number two is setting goals. And, I could give you the whole spiel for my keynote, but, there's a Harvard survey that came out years ago, and I'm sure everybody's heard it. But you're 30 times more likely to achieve your goals simply by writing them down. And so I tell
Yep.
audiences to write down their goals. And the reality is only 4% of the world's population actually write down their goals.
Right. Right.
Well, that's why they're the 4%. That's why they're the rich, the wealthy. They have their businesses. They have a great relationship. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Because they write down their goals and they chase them every day. And 96% of the world's population don't write down their goals. And that's why most people struggle with, man, I hate my job, and they work Monday through Friday, and then they drink Friday, Saturday because they hate their job. And then they wake up hungover on Monday, and they're like, man, I have to do this all over again. Well,
Yep.
because they didn't have goals and they didn't chase them. So they're stuck in this crummy job, having to pay bills because they're behind the eight ball. And so they're stuck doing the life that they don't want, but they have to because they've got bills, and they put themselves in that situation. So I just challenge students and anybody that sees my speech is to write down your goals. Like I tell people, I've got 5 goal boards in my office. I got daily goals, weekly goals. I got goals for the next 20 years of my life.
Oh wow. Yeah, I'm just writing my goals right now. There've been a lot of changes in my life, so I'm back to trying to say, okay, where am I going? What am I supposed to do? So I know exactly what you're talking about.
And you think about it from, obviously I was an athlete, but you think about it from anybody that's trying to get a job.
Yep.
Like, if you don't write down what job you want or what degree you need or what process it's going to take, you're never going to get that
Right.
job. And so I challenge anybody, whether you want to stop working at Walmart and you want to work at, a corporate or, Fortune 500 company. Well, how are you going to do that? Write down that goal. I'm going to go study XYZ.
Sure.
I'm going to go do.
Right. And kind of lay out a plan for yourself.
Yep.
So what's key number 3?
Number 3 is choices and decisions. And I boil it down to is that we have an infinite amount of possibilities every day. And it starts with the choice that we make every single second of every day on what path we're going to take. And so my hope is when I'm done with my speaking and I've told my story, that I challenge the audience members that they are in control of their destiny from this moment forward. As soon as they walk up out of the arena or the gymnasium or the auditorium, they are in control of their life, and it starts with the choice that they make as soon as they walk out that door.
Interesting. Mm-hmm.
And so I challenge those in the audience that if they're struggling with mental health, I challenge them to go talk to a counselor, because that is a choice that they can make at that moment to deal with the pain and the trauma, versus making the choice of, oh, it's not that big of a deal. And then all of a sudden, 4 months down the road, it's spiraling out of control. And
Yep.
they ditched work because they decided to get drunk because they're so mad with their life. Well, if you just go back to that moment after my speech, you had the power to make a choice to address that mental health issue right then.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Sorry about that. Yeah, absolutely. And 4?
And 4 is perseverance. And I have a tie in my speech of desire, where I basically say, no matter how many good choices you make in this life, you are always going to have doubters and naysayers. You're going to have bosses and loved ones and friends and family that tell you you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you can't start XYZ business, you can't go into that career because you're not talented enough.
Right. Mm-hmm.
How many of those people in the audience have that that desire to persevere through all that negativity, all that hostility to achieve their goals that they're writing down. And the sad part about life, and we all know it, the older we get, most of the times it's the closest people to us that are going to drag us down from our dreams because they don't see the vision that we have.
Right.
So how many of my people in the audience are willing to lose friendships, willing to lose loved ones, willing to sacrifice for those goals that they have, because they're always going to have somebody saying, well, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, that's not going to
Right.
work. So like I tell students and audiences all the time, I've lost thousands of relationships. I've lost my family. I basically lost my wife because of this job, because I wasn't going to allow the pandemic. I wasn't going to allow anybody to stop me from this speaking career because I believe it's my purpose and it's my calling.
Mm.
And so I've lost every major person I've loved in this life. I've lost due to this process of chasing down this dream and this purpose. And so again, how many people are willing to sacrifice everything that you want to chase a dream or a goal that you have? And most people aren't willing to do that, and that's why they're not successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're talking about your dedication to what you believe in, and sometimes if people don't share it, they can't go on the journey with us.
Yep.
Pure and simple.
And I watched an interview with it's on the new podcast with LeBron James and JJ Redick, but they asked LeBron about what it took to become the person that he is, and he talked about sacrifice in the sense that he sacrificed his family. They don't get to see him when he's working out 8 hours a day, 9 hours a day. And he just said, you're going to have to sacrifice a lot of the people that you care about in order to achieve this dream. And he has the support because they see his vision and they're on his team supporting him. Where most people, especially when you're first starting to chase a dream, the people around you don't see that vision, and oftentimes they're not going to support you. So how are you going to achieve that
dream? They also
dream?
don't think you can do it, and so they have their own ideas, and so sometimes you have to make that sacrifice.
People have no idea how many hundreds of people told me I would never play college basketball again as a convicted felon, and I didn't listen to any of those people that said it could have never been done. And I found a way to make it happen because I wasn't going to allow those people to drag me down, because I had that desire to change. I had that ability to persevere through all those obstacles to achieve what was one of my goals at that time.
Mm-hmm. And of course, your other goal is to take care of yourself and stay sober and to keep your eye on the ball. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yes, sir. And then the last key to it all is faith. And like I say in my speech, I tell people, I don't care what religion you believe in. I don't care what spirit you follow or deity or whatever it is. But if you have faith in who you are as a person and what you do on a daily basis with the choices you make, like nobody will stop you from achieving what you want to do in this life. And for me, I have faith every day that this is my job and my purpose. I have faith that in my life that God kept me alive for a reason. And that's why I work so hard at this job. That's why I've lost so many friendships. And, basically my marriage went through the tubes because I was chasing this dream so much.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And she didn't share it with you. So,
no.
Yeah, that's the hard part. Someone you care about, and they just don't get it.
They don't get it. They don't see it, and that's sad. But you think about the reality of. I'm sure you've been in the position in your experience living where you had something that you wanted to do and achieve, and the people next to you didn't see that, and you lost them as friendships.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like when I lost my vision or found out I was going to be blind. I made a total career change because I wasn't liking what I could do, but that was the kick in the butt for me to say, oh, this is what I enjoy doing. And that became a long time career for me. And what a difference it makes in mental attitude when you're following what is referred to as follow your bliss.
Yeah.
Well, you also, I think you also, these people that you talk to can reach you by phone or by email as well after the program's over, right?
Yes, sir. With the younger crowd, they always do Instagram and Facebook.
Right,
I
right.
don't have Snapchat. I'm not as cool as those kids, and
None of us are.
I'm not a big fan of social media because I think social media, and I talk about it, is so negative to these kids and their mental health. Living in this 24/7 cycle of
Thank
comparison.
you. Yep.
Like I literally tell the kids and audiences, I don't know if I would have survived as a middle school kid growing up in this generation with all the social media pressures. I was ready to take my life in 8th grade, and that was before cell phones. That was before social media, just based off of peer pressure in the hallways. So these students, and it's not just the students, it's us as adults as well. Like I had to get off of LinkedIn during the pandemic, and LinkedIn's just a grown up version of social
Right,
media.
right.
Well, I had to get off LinkedIn for 6 months because I was watching other speakers find events during the pandemic, and they were traveling during the pandemic. And I'm sitting there going 6 months without a paycheck and find one online event, two online events. And then all my other speaking buddies were finding all these events. I even had somebody that did like 200 online events, and I did like 20. And as a person, it made me feel bad about myself. I felt like an imposter. I felt like a loser because all my peers, so to speak, were finding work. Well, I was struggling because I was comparing myself to them. So I had to get off of LinkedIn because it was ruining my mental health and how I felt
Yeah.
about myself.
That's right. That's right. When you start feeling bad about yourself, looking at these other people, then you've got to change the slate and say, "Oh, no, I can't look at that. I have to look at me."
Yes, sir.
And finding the good things that you're doing. And was that the time that you started on your book, or was that after that?
Well, the book's been. I started the book like 10 years ago because I
Did
had
you?
no idea what I was doing, and everybody's like, "You need to write a book." And so I would find myself in hotels just randomly writing basically like diary entries of a story.
Ah,
And so when I got the book deal with the publisher, I had already written, almost 200,000 words. And I was just going to compile all those journals and stories that I had been writing in the hotels and turn it into, like a biography or an autobiography or whatever it is, a memoir. And after having a conversation with one of the editors, I ended up scrapping all that and writing a new book from scratch.
no kidding.
And so that's what is actually at the last phases right now, and I'll get it back for my last, final edit or review on March 10th or May 10th. But I ended up, writing that book during the pandemic. Mainly, the truth is, most of it was written in the last year, struggling with this divorce. So instead of being in complete darkness, during the divorce process, I found a couple hours every day to write to try to keep my mind, as healthy as possible, because that was the darkest time of my life.
Sure. But you've demonstrated persistence in being able to follow your goal, which is exactly what you're telling other people to do,
Yes.
even despite everything. And that's admirable. I think uh, when you're standing up there in front of your audience you're giving them a role model, a successful role model to follow. And I'm sure they resonate with that.
They do. It's eye-opening and a blessing for how many people can relate to my story. When I first started as a quote unquote keynote speaker, I started with just basketball programs and then college athletics because I thought only athletes could relate to my story. But when I started figuring out and crafting my speech, and I started doing large school assemblies, 3,000 kids, and I started having the students with green hair and coming from theater or 4-H or choir, and I started getting kids from every single different type of demographic and group. I realized my story was powerful, and so when I go into events, I'm trying to get every kid. I get greedy, and everybody says, well, if you can change one kid's life, that's awesome at every event. And that's what my goal is. But when you have goals, you get greedy with them. So I want as many kids as possible. But I also do realize, out of 100%, there's going to be a 10%, maybe 20% of the audience that doesn't relate to my story, or they can't find ties. And that's okay. Because if I can get that other 80%, the mass of them, then I did my job. And hopefully those 20% that I didn't get to are going to see another speaker or another professor or coach that they bump into that will, change their life for them at that moment.
Well, what I'm hearing is just the power of your presentation and how much is sorely needed for people to hear you and hear people like you in terms of, because we're getting very defeated right now. And here to have somebody say, hey, you don't have to go down that road. I'm very struck by the power of what you're presenting to us today.
Yes, sir. And what I've been finding out, especially, and it's just been these last couple weeks, I've actually had almost more teachers come up to me as of late, as adults saying thank you because they're seeing their story, or they're hearing that they can overcome their obstacles, or, maybe they don't want to be the history teacher here forever and they want to be an administrative. Well, now they see like, oh man, I've got these 5 keys. I can do these to get that role. But the stories I've heard from the teachers and the administrative staff over the last couple of weeks it's been a whole nother, avenue that I didn't realize I was impacting. And again, I think that's why when I get my foot in the door for corporate, I think I'll be very successful because I think my story is so powerful. It resonates with everybody in some type of manner, because the reality is most people in their family have somebody that's an alcoholic. Could be your brother, could be your uncle, could be your cousin. But chances are most people know an alcoholic, a drug addict, somebody that's gone through a divorce, I know Jonathan and I talked about this, but one of the keynotes that are points that I talk about in the corporate, and this ties into everything, is, men don't talk about the divorce. They bury it inside and they drink about it and they're struggling.
You got it. Mm-hmm.
Well, I found some data and some research that showed that for every one woman that attempts to take her life after a divorce, 9 men will do the same. And again, it ties back to this whole, what you brought up, Bill, earlier with vulnerability and talking about these issues. So I got multiple calls during the pandemic with friends who had their buddies take their lives during the pandemic because they couldn't deal with the depression or losing their job. And so instead of opening up and feeling safe about, hey, I'm struggling with depression or I lost my job, I can talk about it, they end up drinking and taking their lives. Which is all preventable if we sit down and have these discussions to where you feel like, oh, I'm not alone. Because men, we feel like we're alone, especially when it comes to emotional things. Like we don't want to admit we're sad. We don't want to admit we're struggling. because we feel like we're looked down upon as failures.
Yep. Yeah, that I too had to learn that because that's the male image. John Wayne.
Yep.
You may be too young to remember John Wayne, but it's that image of riding off into the sunset with 3 bullet holes in your belly and just smiling and going off to the next adventure and not letting anybody know that those bullet holes hurt.
Yep.
Yeah.
The reality is every person on this planet faces pain and trauma at some point.
Yes.
And, I found research during the pandemic that, upwards of 60% of the population struggle with mental health during the pandemic. Right. I actually think it's probably closer to 100%, because even those that look good on the outside and, some of these CEOs that made billions of dollars during the pandemic, well, they went through divorces. They lost half their income. Like, even though they're the most powerful person on the planet and everybody sees like their life going in the right direction, well, they're going through a divorce. So they lost this money and so even the most successful people are still struggling with something. It's just how many people want to talk about it or be involved with it. And there's some validity to some of how some of these men handle it by bottling it up inside, and they use it as fuel and they don't talk about it and they're okay with it. But there's a big percentage of men that need to talk about it, because it will help them. I don't go to therapy anymore because my keynote and my speaking is my therapy session. That allows me to talk about all this stuff. And right. So when and then I have, the hundreds of conversations on top of that, that's my therapy because I get to talk about all the things that have messed up my life. I get to talk about, my depression in middle school. I get to talk about my drunk driving accident and talk about that pain. I get to talk about my divorce and tell people like it was the worst time of my life, but I keep going and I talk about it because I'm going to use it as fuel to keep motivating myself to push on to help other people.
Noble goal. I really want to thank you for being on Blindsight today and allowing us to tell your story, to let people hear not only what you've been through, but the attitude that you have and your willingness to and encouragement to other people to not keep things, pardon the pun, bottled up, and to be able to be real. Congratulations. Thank you for being out there. And I hope keep in touch and let us know how you're doing. This is Bill Lundgren, Blindsight. I really appreciate having our guest today and hope that you will hear him in person at some point. And to all of you, remember our feedback is by telephone is 720-712-8856 and or email feedback@aftersight.org. I'll get that right one of these days. Thank you for being with us, and until the next time.